for a safe space where healing might take place, where everyone is valued. Given tools to maintain where equity matters. Less talk, more action, where anyone is welcome. Don't send them home packing, this is strong talk. When conversation pops off, speak life, reflect hope, promote choice and love folk. Strong talk, real talk, no jokes. Recovery, culture, community. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to Strong Talk, a podcast dedicated to the discussion of equity, diversity, and family as it relates to mental health and addictions. A space not only to talk about challenges, but to explore and create space for solutions. I'm your host, Vic Armstrong, and I want to thank you all for joining me on this journey. I'm joined today by Keris Myrick, Vice President of Partnerships and Innovation at Inseparable. She's also the podcast host for Unapologetically Black Unicorns. She's on the board of directors of Disability Rights California and on the board of Mental Health America. And she is a certified personal medicine coach. Keris, thank you so much for being with me today.
Wow. So thank you for having me. This is exciting. I'm always excited to talk to people about like mental health stuff. So yay, let's get into it.
Well, good. Yeah, it's been a minute since we talked. So it's always great to see you and always great to catch up with you and all the exciting things you're doing. Because you are one of those people that is extremely busy. Tell me about a little bit about Inseparable for folks that don't know about Inseparable. What is Inseparable?
Yeah, so Inseparable is a nonprofit organization. It is both a C3 and a C4. And basically the idea is just think of the word inseparable, that the health of our minds is inseparable from the health of our bodies. And basically what we do is we work in the mental health advocacy space, but we do it a little bit different. We take on a campaign sort of approach with specific goals around, we have three targeted areas. One is closing the treatment gap, and the other is youth mental health, and the third is changing crisis response. So we really work in the policy space using that campaign approach to make things better for people with mental health conditions.
You picked three pretty heavy areas too when you talk about the youth mental health and crisis space and then the treatment gap. Can you talk a little bit about when you say treatment gap, what does that mean?
Yeah, for us, we're talking about something very specific. And so, like, remember, we're thinking about policy levers. What are some policy levers in that area? And the first one that, we're really focused on is insurance and what insurance pays for. Is there real parity or not? Also, we're looking at things like ghost networks, which I testified for at the federal level, which is really about, like, I had insurance. I had fantastic insurance, but then when I went to the provider directory to find a mental health provider, there was literally no there.
Right.
So that is called a ghost network, where names may be listed.
Yeah.
You're taking this insurance and you're thinking, look at all these psychiatrists who are here, or therapists or what have you. And then you go to make an appointment and you, like, I would call and that person doesn't work here. Oh, that person retired. Oh yeah, that person died. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
So you're picking maybe insurance based on access. And then when you try to access, the actual directory is inaccurate. So that's what ghost networks are about. And we're really trying to advance legislation that would change the ability, really change those ghost networks and make those directories accurate and up to date.
See, that to me brings up a couple of things, because you mentioned ghost networks and then you also mentioned parity. And so to me, when I think about both of those things, what comes to mind for me is that even when we talk about parity, and we're talking about providing equal access to mental health services or providing mental health services equitably to the way that you provide access to physical health services. But when we talk about parity in terms of a provider providing coverage for mental health services, we still have the challenge of, do those services exist? And so when we talk about parity, for example, in Black and Brown communities, one of the issues I always have is that even if we said that the insurance carrier is going to pay for services um, equally, it doesn't help historically marginalized communities, especially Black and Brown communities, when you don't have those resources existing in your communities to start with.
Yeah.
And so that parity piece always kind of strikes a little bit of a nerve with me, because parity, the people who never had anything and continue not to have anything, parity to them doesn't look like parity. It looks like privilege. If you are saying that for folks that live in certain communities, well, we're going to make sure you have access to mental health resources just as you do the physical resources, but folks in some communities don't have access to either, there's still a gap there. And so
Yeah.
we talk about those kind of those ghost networks. A lot of times, the communities that get ghosted are Black and Brown communities.
Yeah, I think you're really bringing up something when we're trying to ensure that parity, equity, equality, all of those things really make sense on the ground, right? And so I think that's the interesting thing about the way that we do our work, which is really kind of grassroots movement work. So, we can't tell a community what the community needs. The community has to tell us. So,
Right.
I, and in my job as vice president of partnerships, like I never knew there was such a job. I never knew I would be good at such a job, actually, because I'm quite shy. So the idea that I would know a bunch of people and be able to pull people together or have other people help pull people together was sort of striking to me. But it's about us bringing the community to be able to pass that policy or legislation in their state. So we don't work like in all states. Like we're not that big. Right. And again, taking that campaign approach, I think, which is about strategy. Our strategy is to work state by state and also to connect to stakeholders and partners, in that state, and create a movement around a particular policy issue. So I
Mhm.
think that's exactly right. Like, what does it look like when you want to have access to those services? First we'll start with the insurance part, and then the next piece is, okay, well, where are the services that the insurance will pay for?
Mhm.
Kind of
Mhm.
like, piece by piece for us.
Yeah. I have to, for folks who don't know, you also identify as a person with lived mental health experience. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then how does that impact the way that you approach the work that you do, having that experience?
Yeah, so, and again, this is not exactly what I thought I would do growing up. It was not like, oh, let me become a mental health advocate. I actually consider myself an accidental advocate um, because of having lived experience of a mental health condition and having to navigate the various systems, and find or not find services that would meet my needs, and then get angry about it and then wonder how to fix it. And I'll
Mhm.
never forget, somebody told me, well, you got to become an advocate if you want to fix it. You can't sit here and just complain to me. And I was like, what? I do? Okay. That's sort of how I got into it. And I started first, leading some art groups. This to say that, for
Mhm.
example, I was finding that, a lot of the focus on my recovery journey was about honestly taking meds and being in treatment, which, all right, but what else,
Right.
and whether I was interested in that and did that was not really what I was concerned about. I was more concerned about, but why aren't we talking about the things I love to do and I'm not doing right now that I want to do? So I actually started some art groups because I just loved art, and that art was a way that I could engage, that I could find my voice, because again, could be kind of shy or
Mhm.
introverted. But when I'm doing artwork, I can talk,
Yeah.
because I'm focused on that artwork, and we could talk about what was happening, with the art amongst each other. So that's kind of how it started and how I was using my lived experience to come up with creative means to do things. But no matter where I work, I'm always infusing, well, what was that experience like for me? What is it like for
Right.
other people? And then how do I bring that understanding into the work that I'm doing?
So for a lot of people, I hear that are kind of in the peer space. A lot of people end up in the space that they're in because of their lived experience, and then other people are in the space that they're in, and they bring the lived experience there, and it kind of helps inform the way that they navigate their space. How would you describe your journey? Do you do what you do because of your lived experience, or is that just an added piece that gives you a different lens for what you do?
Oh, wow. So when I when I first got my diagnosis, which, I'll be open about that, is, well, you can Google it and you'll find it anyway. I first got a diagnosis of schizophrenia, and I was told everything I couldn't, wouldn't, or shouldn't do, basically, is what happened. And it was so reminiscent of what my parents had told me about thinking about when I entered school, as a Black child. Well, the teachers are going to tell you what you can't do, what you shouldn't do, what you'll never do. You
Right.
won't go to college. You won't. So it was a very familiar narrative that, in some ways was, meant that I had to combat the narrative. I
Hmm.
just had to do that because I've done that all my life already. So,
Right.
um, when I was also told, you're going to get better care and you're going to have access to more if you move from private insurance to Medicaid and go on public insurance. And I did have to, stop working because I was not well. And when I was ready to go back to work, everybody said, "Oh, become a peer supporter." And I'm like, um, I have an MBA, and that's great. That's great. Peer support is awesome. I, benefit from it. I started the art group. That's fantastic. But I really want to use what I love, that business experience, that industrial organizational psychology experience. I want to
Mhm.
use that. And everybody said, "Oh, well, you got to be a peer supporter." And I was like, Why?" And I said, "Okay, well, so initially I was sort of tracked to just do peer support,
Yeah.
without any thought about, but what is my core gift? And what am I really good at? And what do I want to do? Um, and I ended up actually running a peer run organization. So being able to use that core gift of management and business acumen and team building and coaching and strategic planning, all that stuff that I like to do, I was able to do it in a space to help other people advance as peer supporters,
Mhm.
because that's what they saw as their career. And then I just kept using, that's when I figured out, oh, well, I might be the CEO of Project Return Peer Support
Mhm.
Network, but my title isn't peer CEO, it is CEO.
Right.
So, in fact, any job I have, I can use my lived experience to inform the work that I'm doing. Anybody could
Mhm.
do it. And that's sort of how I've navigated and sort of found my way around. And I use my lived experience at Inseparable. Many of us do there. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating, and I think it makes perfect sense. It also speaks to the fact that there's an added diversity bonus when you have someone that brings another perspective, another lived experience, and perspective to the table. When you talked about, some of the same challenges being, growing up as a Black female and being told the things that you weren't going to be able to do, it really gets me thinking about the intersectionality of people that have lived mental health experience along with other things you deal with. And case in point, a lot of what is occurring even at AFSP, where I am now in our space, is really thinking about the intersectionality of people and realizing that there is no such thing as a one size fits all approach. That we have to think about, especially we're talking about getting upstream. That we have to think about how do we reach people in communities where they live, work, play, and pray, which means we really have to think about how we build relationships with those communities.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you're involved in now is you are on the board of directors for Disability Rights California.
Mhm.
And so again, you're talking about people that have a unique lived experience. And when we talk about equity, we don't, we think about equity in terms of, and we talk about historically marginalized communities, we think of it in terms oftentimes of race and ethnicity. We don't think about other things like, the rural piece versus urban, or, even some of the age discrepancies and disparities. But we also don't talk enough about people who live with physical challenges, physical disabilities. That Can you talk a little bit about that intersectionality, people that live with mental health challenges and have physical challenges. What's that like in terms of access to services? Are there things that we all need to be thinking about in our advocacy as we are fighting for resources and access in our communities?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I know in my work, I've always been a nudge about, is this accessible to people?
Mhm.
When we were opening a peer respite, for example, when I worked at Project Return, and we were looking at the various facilities or houses, it was really a house. I don't like to call it a facility, houses that we could rent. The first thing I was looking at is where can people enter? So if it
Mhm.
had stairs that go into the front door, but no access for somebody in a wheelchair or somebody with mobility um, uh, issues, then I was like, well, we need to make sure that there's a ramp. And somebody would tell me, oh, well, it's flat at the back, so they can enter in the back. And I said, no. Everybody needs to be able to access the entrance they want to enter, not be forced to enter where it just happens to be convenient, right? Or
Mhm.
it's already built out. Making sure that our bathrooms and kitchen and everything was accessible equally to people was something that people were like, Keris, could you really like tone it down? And I'm like, no, I can't, because I know what it's like to be left out. So
Mhm.
I don't want anybody to feel left out. Um, and I always had an interest in, why is the disability community and the mental health community, why are they not working closer together? And
Yeah.
for example, the passage of ADA, the passage of Olmsted are great examples, 504, great examples when our communities have come together.
Mhm.
However, they tend to be segregated. And, I think there's a lot of stigma for people with various physical health challenges or even diversity, if that I think that would be okay to say that, right? Neurodiversity, that there's still stigma about having a mental health condition. Because
Yeah.
if you had, for example, a developmental disability back in the day, people would say, oh, you're crazy, but you didn't want to be called crazy any more than people with a mental health condition want to be
Right.
called crazy, right? So there was this separation of, oh, we're not that, we're this. And then
Right.
for people with mental health conditions, we're on the recovery track. So how do we understand disability in the frame of recovery? And
Yeah.
it all does fit because so I've been really working on trying to find ways to and I am a bridge builder. That is one thing people know about me, um because there's too much work, too much to be done in order for us to think about, I only got my little piece of the pie. Because the reality is, you're right, you get the crumbs, you don't get the pie. We should all be going for the pie together, right?
Mhm.
So my work in this area brought me to Disability Rights California, because their director, who I had been following and who helped me, Andy Imparato, is also a person with lived experience of a mental health condition. So I was like,
Mhm.
okay, timing is right, person is right. Maybe
Mhm.
this is now a way to be an example for the nation of how we can work collaboratively together. So it is critically important we do not live single issue lives. People with physical disabilities may also have mental health disabilities. People with mental health disabilities may also have physical disabilities.
Right.
We can't segregate the fact that I technically have vision issues from the fact that I have a mental health condition, from the
Right.
fact that I had thyroid cancer and am a cancer survivor. So all of those things, and that I'm a person of color. I mean, and I'm glad you all are thinking about some of this at AFSP, because when I was first struggling with uh, what I would call living life, we'll put it that way, right? That was a struggle for me, and I am a suicide attempt survivor. Much of what I was struggling with was around racism and discrimination. And everybody wanted me to build resilience around that. And I'm like, why should I build resilience around racism? Can we attack the racism? Right?
Mhm.
Can we talk about like how these things affect me as a Black person? That's what we need to talk about. And we need to address those things, not address the individual, because racism will continue to exist. And we need to kind of, get rid of racism. So
Right.
um, yeah, that was kind of a roundabout way of sort of thinking about the
Yeah.
intersectionality of it all.
Well, you know, you also kind of got my mind thinking about something else, because a lot of what you talked about, the challenges, the things you've had to deal with, yet you have accomplished a lot. And you are a person that has influence in this field, in the mental health field, with the work that you've done. Um, but you also talked about early on how you never thought you'd be here. You never thought this was the space you'd end up in. Um, what is it that how do you get here? What is that motivates you to keep moving? And especially as you're a self-described shy individual. So what is it that keeps you moving forward, and how do you keep finding new areas to conquer? And then where does that energy come from to keep those doors down?
Wow, that's yeah, I think oh man, there's so many answers I have right now running through my head. I think it was Toni Morrison who said one of the responsibilities of people who are free is to free others.
Mm,
And so I live deep in that um I wouldn't wish some of what I went through uh on anybody else. And so I feel like just to walk away from it and go, oh, well, I had that bad experience. Somebody else will have to figure it out. That's just not
mm,
the person I am. I don't think that's the family that I come from. We're doers, we're thinkers, we're change makers, I think, as a
mm,
as a family. So probably there's something in my DNA or inherent in being able to see the power of being involved in change. Um,
mm,
and I think, I'm also an army brat or a global nomad, as I like to call it, because that whole experience didn't feel too bratty. But, living in other countries, and my father and mother were very strategic about what we were doing when we lived in another country, which was we
mm,
were learning the language. We were part of the infrastructure of the culture. Only once did we live on an army base. Otherwise, we live in community with the people. And so it's really taught me about the importance of learning about the other, because they're other to me, but you know what I
mm.
mean. But learning the language, learning the culture, being cognizant of those differences, and I think that's kind of what also has fueled how I do my work and the importance of doing my work. Is understanding my experience is one experience that may be multiplied. However, there are other experiences. I call it like the elephant. You know,
Mm,
the three blind men and the elephant. All of us are touching the elephant of mental health. We're all touching it from a different experience, but it's still mental health. So how do we not kill the elephant, right?
mm.
But integrate those different experiences to have the most healthy, beautiful elephant that we could possibly have.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's kind of how I do it and where it's come from. Yeah.
That's fantastic. When you have these conversations, because different communities are really at different places in having conversations around mental health and around suicide. And I know, coming from a rural Black community, it was not something we talked about growing up. And if we talked about mental health and suicide, it really was, in large part, it was a conversation about how it wasn't our issue. Suicide was a white issue. Mental health, we don't talk about it. It's, it was what happened in this house stays in this house, that kind of thing.
Yes.
So there really was not a lot of openness to talking about challenges. And so now, as a Black female with lived mental health experience, with being a suicide attempt survivor, um, what is it like trying to have that conversation with people, and especially people in the Black community, who oftentimes don't want to have that conversation?
Oh, it's just a change of language. I
Yeah,
think and it's just using language and experiences that are common amongst us, that where again, we might not use the words, mental illness or, even diagnostic
yeah,
terms, but we certainly have, loved ones who we know, quote unquote, who are touched, quote unquote, right? So we
right.
could talk about that touched loved one. What would help that touched loved one? That loved one is still a part of, the family ecosystem. We love that person. Sometimes it's hard to love that person, and that person might be put out because
Mhm.
it's hard on the family. So the question is, where is the putting out? Where does that
Right.
happen? How can we
Yeah.
help that loved one who's touched? Just using completely different language. And I found that also in the Latino community, because I was speaking with a friend of mine and I was at a family gathering, small, well, it was their dinner. I call it a family gathering, like everybody and their sister was there, but that's a Latino community. And they have a loved one who is in jail right now, has a mental health condition, who's been accused of a crime, etc. And as they were talking, it was very much an internal conversation. And so I used a phrase that's similar to a Black phrase about we don't hang our dirty laundry, like we don't hang our dirty laundry outside. And their phrase is more like we do our laundry inside, or we keep our clothes inside, something like that. It's a little bit different when you translate it, but I said the phrase actually in Spanish, and literally one of the family members whipped her head around and said, "Oh my gosh, you understand?" And I said,
Mm.
I said, "We have the same phrase in our family, and this is how we say it." And then she just opened up. The
Yeah,
whole family just blossomed and opened up and told me things that I have understood they have not told others, because they understood that I understood, right?
right.
So having that cultural connection and understanding the language
Yeah,
can help break open um, the communication and strategies to work forward.
absolutely. There is value in feeling like your experience is relatable to the person that you're talking to, and that
Exactly.
you don't have to explain. Like when you say to me, if you talk to me about the pain of racism, you don't have to explain to me what that is, because it's a shared experience. So thank you so much, Keris. Is there anything that we have not touched on that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Um, so I'm a quote person, and I'm just going to leave people with one other quote about
Fantastic.
when people speak up, and sometimes we might not be able to hear what they're saying because it can feel kind of harsh, but we need to be able to listen. And this is a quote from Audre Lorde, who says in her Litany for Survival poem, "And when we speak, we're afraid our words will not be heard nor welcomed, but when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive." And that's the case for so many people, that they find it within themselves to speak up and to speak their truth. And though it may not be comfortable for us, it's so important to sit and listen, and hopefully partner in helping people to survive. So thanks for
Absolutely.
having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Keris, thank you so much for being with me today. And thank you to everyone for joining us for today's episode of the Strong Talk podcast. We encourage you to continue to listen as we continue to have great guests like my guest today, Keris. Keris, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today. And I'll see you all next time on Strong Talk. Health equity implies that ideally everyone should have a fair opportunity to attain their full health potential, that no one should be disadvantaged from achieving that potential. In order to ensure health equity, we must address the social and structural drivers of inequities that can lead to health disparities, including mental health challenges. As it pertains to those social determinants or social drivers of health, some communities have disproportionately experienced inequity and trauma. People who identify as LGBTQ, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, rural communities, immigrants, refugees, non English speaking people, and people living with physical disabilities. In order to eliminate health disparities, we must be willing to address the issues that impair quality of life and fall disproportionately on historically marginalized communities. At the heart of addressing disparities, particularly in mental health, is access to care that is culturally relevant, care that is relatable to my lived experience, care that I am willing to utilize. Access to care should mean access to safety and connection. Safety and connection require trusted relationships in which to thrive. And those relationships must be built on transparent, accurate, and frequent communication, including information about available access to resources, disaggregated data, utilization of resources, and the impact of those resources in all communities. Communities want access to culturally specific materials and campaigns designed to speak directly to marginalized populations, including BIPOC communities, veteran communities, LGBTQ, and those with physical disabilities, and rural communities who will often be under resourced and heavily dependent upon a law enforcement response to those experiencing mental health emergencies. A promise of health equity is not only a promise of a fair and just system with more access to care, it is a promise of safety, connection, and relationship for those who have been historically marginalized. And make no mistake, individuals living with mental health challenges, intellectual disabilities, and addiction are and always have been historically marginalized. And that is Strong Talk.
What's the word? What's the word? Word, strong talk, strong talk. What's the word? What's the word? What's the word? Yeah. What's the word? Strong talk, strong talk.